I didn't take the lighthouse job because I wanted adventure. I took it because I needed to disappear for a while. The posting didn't say much. Seasonal maintenance technician, remote coastal structure, rotational stay required, good pay, no internet, no cellular signal, no visitors after sunset. That part should have bothered me more. But at the time, isolation felt like relief. I'd just been laid off from my engineering firm, 3 years of night shifts maintaining automated harbour systems, replaced by software I helped design. There's something humbling about being automated out of existence. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were sending me to inspect a lighthouse that had already been automated. The keeper had been replaced 14 years ago, officially. Unofficially, the listing had been reposted 3 times in the last 2 years. No one stayed longer than a week. No explanation was provided, just short contracts, early departures, and one resignation letter that consisted of a single sentence. I don't think it likes being alone. I assumed that was a joke, or a breakdown, or both. The boat dropped me off just before dusk. The lighthouse stood on a narrow rock shelf carved into the cliffside, white paint weathered down to grey bone, iron railing rusted in uneven streaks. It wasn't picturesque. It looked tired, like something still doing its job long after the world forgot why it mattered. The mainland was visible in the distance, a small coastal town no more than a mile across the water. At night, I was told, the beam still rotated every 12 seconds. Perfect timing, perfect mechanical rhythm. Automation had handled everything for years. All I had to do was routine inspection, log the rotation, check the motor housing, sleep, repeat. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the warmth. The place should have been cold. Stone walls, open sea air. No heating system listed in the schematics, but the air inside felt recently occupied. Not cozy, just used. The spiral staircase wound upward in tight circles, metal steps ringing softly under my boots. Halfway up, I saw it. A boot print in the dust. Fresh. It faced upward. I told myself it was mine. It had to be mine. But I hadn't walked that far yet, and the tread pattern wasn't mine. I reached the lantern room just as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon. The beam was already active, rotating, slow, measured, steady, every 12 seconds exactly. I checked my watch, counted. It was precise to the millisecond. Automation hadn't failed, but someone had lit the manual oil lantern beside the control panel. The automation system didn't require it. There was no reason for it to be burning, and yet the glass was warm, recently trimmed, fresh wick. There was also a logbook on the desk. That part confused me. The lighthouse had been digitized years ago. Records were stored in a harbour database, cloud-backed, time-stamped. There was no operational reason for a paper log. The entries were neat, careful handwriting, dated yesterday. Signed, Thomas Hale. Thomas Hale was the last official lighthouse keeper. He died 14 years ago. Heart attack. Found at the base of the spiral stairs. That was in the briefing file they sent me. The entry from yesterday read, rotation normal, wind steady from the east. It tried again at 2:13 a.m. Mimicked the foghorn. Closer this time. I stood there longer than I should have. The beam continued its perfect 12-second rotation. Out to sea. Across the dark water. Back again. As if nothing was wrong. At exactly 2:13 a.m. that night, the foghorn sounded. And we don't have a foghorn installed. The foghorn didn't come from the water. That was the first thing I checked. I stepped into the lantern room and looked out across the dark. The sea was calm. No incoming vessels. No flashing signal lights in the distance. If a ship had sounded a horn, I would have seen it. And even if I hadn't, I would have felt it in the water. Sound carries differently out there. It stretches, it bends, it travels over the surface. But this didn't travel. It didn't echo across the waves. It came from inside the lighthouse. Not loud, not mechanical, just wrong. The kind of wrong your body reacts to before your brain does. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. The beam continued its perfect 12-second rotation, out across the sea, back across the cliffs, out again. Precise, reliable, indifferent. At 2:17 a.m., I went downstairs. The sound had seemed to come from below the lantern room, somewhere in the stairwell. I told myself it was wind through the structure. Old metal expands, stone shifts, pressure builds in strange ways near the ocean. There are logical explanations for most things. I reached the landing halfway down and stopped. There was another boot print in the dust. It hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. This one faced downward, as if someone had been standing there, listening. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, embarrassment. Because I was alone, and I was starting to feel watched. I went back up to the lantern room and locked the door. There was no reason to. The lighthouse had one entrance at ground level. The rest was stone and steel. Still, I locked it. I didn't sleep that night. At 6:03 a.m., just before sunrise, I checked the logbook again. There was a new entry. The ink was still wet. Rotation normal, wind steady. He heard it too. My hands were steady when I read it. That bothered me more than anything else, because I didn't remember writing it. I compared the handwriting in daylight. I brought the logbook down to the small table near the base of the stairs. Natural light makes things clearer, or at least that's what I told myself. The entry from the night before sat just beneath the previous day's record. Same pen, same pressure, same slight tilt to the right. I went upstairs and brought down my own notebook. I've been logging maintenance checks separately: motor torque, gear alignment, rotation timing. I placed the two side by side. It wasn't similar. It wasn't close. It was identical. Even the way I crossed my sevens, even the hesitation mark before finishing a capital R. You don't notice those things until you're looking for them. I closed the book. Not quickly, not dramatically, just carefully, as if shutting it too fast would confirm something. That morning, I ran a full diagnostic on the rotation system. Everything checked out. 12 seconds per sweep, consistent voltage draw, no motor lag, no mechanical drag. Perfect automation. At least, it was supposed to be 12 seconds. At 1:58 a.m. the following night, I stood in the lantern room with a stopwatch. I wanted numbers. Numbers don't lie. The beam rotated. 12 seconds. Again. 12 seconds. Again. 12. Then 11. I frowned. Reset the stopwatch. Counted again. 12. 12. 11. The beam wasn't slowing. It was skipping, as if shaving a second off at random, but not random. It happened every time the light faced north-northeast, toward the mainland, toward the town. I checked the motor housing. No fluctuation, no stutter in the gears, nothing physical causing it. The system logs showed 12 seconds across the board. Perfect, unbroken, recorded. But I was standing there, watching it, and it was wrong. At 2:13 a.m. the foghorn sounded again, closer this time, Not louder, closer. Like it wasn't travelling through air at all, like it was vibrating through the metal beneath my feet. The beam rotated, out to sea, back toward land, out again, 11 seconds. Then it stopped. Not fully, just hesitated, pointed directly toward the mainland, and held there. I didn't count. I didn't move. I just watched. 1 second. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The beam resumed its rotation as if nothing had happened. The motor never changed pitch. The system log still read 12 seconds. Perfect. At 2:19 a.m. my phone buzzed. There is no signal at the lighthouse. The screen lit up anyway. One notification. No sender, no number, just 3 words. He sees you. So I didn't respond to the message. There was no number attached, no signal, no timestamp that made sense, just 3 words on a screen that shouldn't have been receiving anything. He sees you. I told myself it was stress. Sleep deprivation does strange things to pattern recognition. You start assigning meaning where there isn't any. By daylight, everything felt manageable again. The sea was flat. The town looked ordinary. Fishing boats moved in slow arcs along the shoreline. If something had changed, I couldn't see it. That didn't mean it hadn't. That night I stayed in the lantern room. I didn't go downstairs at 2:13. I didn't follow the sound when the foghorn started again. Because it did. Right on time. But this time it wasn't a full blast. It was broken, distorted, almost like someone trying to hum it. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from the sea. It wasn't coming from the stairwell. It was coming from the door, close enough that I could hear breath between the tones. I didn't move. The handle didn't turn. Nothing knocked. It just stayed there, low, imperfect, trying. The beam rotated, out to sea, back towards town, out again, 12 seconds, 12, 11. I watched the mainland carefully this time. At exactly 2:13 a.m., when the beam hesitated towards the town, a section of shoreline went dark. Not the whole grid, just a strip, like someone had pulled a curtain of shadow across it. The beam resumed rotation. The lights flickered back. I told myself it was coincidence. Power fluctuations happen near water. Infrastructure fails. Storm damage lingers. Except there wasn't a storm, and I knew the rotation had paused longer than before. I checked the system logs immediately, still reading 12 seconds. Perfect. Unbroken. I turned back towards the door. The humming had stopped. In its place, very softly, I heard my own voice, from the other side, not speaking clearly, just breathing, matching my rhythm. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. I stepped backward without meaning to. The beam turned again, towards the mainland. It slowed, held, 10 seconds, 11, 12, 13. I felt something shift in the room. Not movement, pressure, like the air itself was tightening. And then the rotation snapped forward violently. The motor groaned for the first time since I arrived. Metal, grinding, resisting. When I looked at the desk, the logbook had shifted, just slightly. A new line sat beneath the previous entry. Different ink, sharper handwriting. Do not answer it. That was all it said. No signature, no date, just that sentence. The breathing stopped, and that's when I understood. It wasn't standing outside the door. It was moving through the lighthouse itself, pressing against it, waiting for the beam to fail. The next morning, I counted the houses. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I was trying to prove something to myself. Maybe I was hoping I'd been wrong. From the lantern room, the town looks smaller than it is. You can trace the coastline with your eyes. Cluster of buildings near the pier. A row of houses slightly north. The old red-roofed house near the bend in the road. I focused on that one, because I remembered it clearly. Red roof, white siding, small wooden dock stretching into the shallows. It stood out. That morning, it wasn't there. Not damaged, not burned, not collapsed. Gone. In its place was an uninterrupted stretch of shoreline. No debris, no foundation, no discoloration in the sand. Just water, as if nothing had ever been built there. I told myself distance distorts perception. Light bends over water. Fog shifts perspective. I went downstairs and got the binoculars, brought them back up, adjusted the focus slowly. The stretch of coastline remained empty. No dock, no house, no red roof. My hands were steady. That scared me more than if they'd been shaking. I checked the harbour database on the maintenance terminal. The property registry loaded. Street names, lot numbers, zoning classifications. The address where the red-roofed house should have been did not exist. It skipped from 12 to 16. No gap, no archived file, no placeholder. I searched historical records. Nothing. No permits, no ownership, no photographs. I closed the terminal because I remembered it. And if I remembered it, then something had changed. That night, the foghorn didn't wait for 2:13. It started at 1:52, low, distorted, but clearer than before, not humming now. It had found the pitch. The sound moved. That was new. It circled the lighthouse slowly, not in air, through the structure, testing it. The beam rotated. 12 seconds, 12, 11, 10. Every time the light faced north-northeast, I felt it, behind my eyes, like something aligning. The breathing returned. Not outside the door, through the railing, through the floor, through the metal beneath my boots. It wasn't matching my rhythm anymore. It was leading it. Inhale, pause. Exhale, pause. I realized it was waiting for me to speak first, waiting for me to answer it. The beam slowed again. 9 seconds, 10, 11, 12, 13. The motor shrieked. The entire shoreline went dark. Not a strip this time, everything. 3 seconds of complete blackness. When the lights returned, there was a gap in the row of houses north of the pier. A clean absence. I didn't need binoculars to see it. Something was missing. No emergency lights, no smoke, no sirens, just empty space where structure had been. The foghorn stopped. The pressure lifted. The beam resumed its perfect 12-second rotation, as if nothing had happened. I stayed awake until sunrise. I counted the houses again. The gap remained. No one seemed to notice. No activity, no disturbance, like it had never existed. I looked at the logbook. No new warning, no explanation, just the previous line. Do not answer it. For the first time since I arrived, I considered leaving the lantern room at night. Not because I was curious, because I was afraid that if I stayed here much longer, there wouldn't be a town left to look at. I stopped trying to sleep after the second house disappeared. The lantern room had become the only place that felt stable. As long as the beam kept moving, the pressure in the structure stayed manageable. Downstairs, the air felt different, heavier, like the lighthouse was holding its breath. The foghorn started earlier every night. 1:52, 1:41, 1:33. By the fourth night, it began just after midnight. No blast, no signal pattern, just a low, imperfect tone moving through the stone and iron of the tower, testing it, learning it. I stopped counting the houses after the third disappearance, not because I didn't want to know, because I already did. The gaps along the shoreline had started to feel deliberate, measured, as if something out there was learning how much time it needed, how long the beam had to hesitate, how much darkness it could steal. That night the wind shifted, strong from the east. The beam cut through thin fog rolling in off the water. For the first time since I arrived, I couldn't see the town clearly, just scattered lights through the mist. The foghorn didn't start. Not at midnight, not at 1, not even at 2. At 2:13 a.m, something else happened. The radio turned on. The lighthouse still had an old marine receiver mounted beside the terminal. I hadn't touched it once. It was supposed to be disconnected from the harbour network. The speaker crackled, static, then a voice, weak, distorted. "Hello?" I froze. The voice came again. "Lighthouse, do you copy?" I recognised it immediately. Evan Carter. He owned the small bait shop near the pier. I had spoken to him once when the boat dropped me off. Except the signal wasn't coming from the harbour channel. The receiver wasn't even powered. "Hello?" The voice sounded closer this time, strained, like it was trying to push through interference. "Can anyone hear me?" The beam rotated, out to sea, back toward town, out again. 12 seconds. 11. 10. The voice came through the speaker again, only this time, it wasn't asking for help. It was repeating something, the same phrase, over and over. "Can you see me?" The beam hesitated toward the mainland. The fog rolled thicker across the water. The voice continued. "Can you see me? Can you see me? Can you—" The radio died. The beam resumed its normal rotation. The fog thinned slightly. I stepped toward the window. Near the shoreline, something moved. Not a person, not exactly, just a darker shape shifting inside the fog. Tall, unsteady, like a reflection trying to stand upright. It didn't approach the lighthouse. It stayed near the waterline, waiting, watching. The beam passed over it once. For a fraction of a second, the shape became clearer, and I understood something that made the back of my neck go cold. It wasn't looking at the lighthouse. It was looking up at the lantern room. I stepped back from the glass. The logbook sat open on the desk. No new writing, no warning, just the same line from the night before. Do not answer it. For the first time since I arrived, I realized staying in the lantern room might not be enough. If the beam was already failing, someone in that town needed to know what was happening. And the only person left who might understand it was the man whose name kept appearing in this logbook, Thomas Hale. So the next morning, for the first time since I took the job, I left the lighthouse.
The boat ride to the mainland takes less than 15 minutes. I had watched that distance for days from the lantern room. It had never felt far before, but crossing it felt different, like stepping outside a boundary I didn't fully understand. The lighthouse grew smaller behind me as the motor hummed across the water. The beam was still rotating, even in daylight, a slow white arc sweeping across the fog. I caught myself counting. 12 seconds. Still perfect. The town looked normal when I docked. Too normal. Fishermen unloading crates near the pier. A delivery truck idling beside the grocery store. The same bait shop with its faded wooden sign. Life moving exactly the way it always had. No one looked worried. No one looked confused. No one looked like they had lost anything. But I knew they had. The bait shop bell rang softly when I pushed the door open. Evan Carter stood behind the counter. Same heavy jacket, same tired expression. He looked up. Back already? I stared at him longer than I should have. The radio voice. The one from the lighthouse. It had sounded exactly like him. You been out on the water this morning? I asked. Evan shrugged. Since 5? I studied his face. No fear, no confusion, no sign that he'd spent the night calling for help through a marine radio. Everything all right at the tower? He asked. I almost told him. About the houses, about the darkness along the shoreline, about the foghorn humming through the metal of the lighthouse. But something stopped me. Instead, I asked a different question. There used to be a red-roofed house near the bend north of the pier. Evan frowned. What bend?
The shoreline curve just past Harbour Road. He leaned against the counter and looked out the window toward the water. There's nothing there, he said. Just rocks. There was a house, I said. White siding, small dock. Evan chuckled softly. You're thinking of the old Miller place. My stomach tightened. Yes. That's 2 miles south, he said. Burned down years ago. I said nothing, because I knew that wasn't true. I had seen the red roof with my own eyes from the lantern room, every night since I arrived, until it vanished. I tried again. What about Harbour Lane? What about it? Why does the address skip numbers? Evan looked confused. What are you talking about? From 12 to 16. That's always been like that. He said it casually, like it was obvious, like I was the one asking strange questions. I stepped outside. The wind carried the smell of salt and diesel from the harbour. People moved through the streets like nothing had changed. A woman walked her dog past the grocery store. 2 men argued over bait prices near the pier. Normal life. Perfectly normal. I walked toward Harbour Lane. The row of houses looked exactly the way I remembered, except for the space, the empty space where one of them should have been. I stood there staring at it. An open stretch of grass between 2 houses. No broken soil, no construction marks, no sign anything had ever been built there. Just a clean gap. A man watering his lawn glanced at me. You lost? He asked. I pointed toward the empty space. What was there before? He looked at the gap, then back at me. Before what? A house. He shook his head. There's never been a house there. I didn't argue. I just nodded and walked away, because I could see the truth written in every window around me. No one here remembered anything missing. The town had already corrected itself, and if the lighthouse hadn't been there, I would have believed them. I didn't go back to the lighthouse immediately. Something about standing on Harbour Lane had made one thing painfully clear. Whatever was happening out there, the town had already forgotten most of it, which meant the answers wouldn't come from people. They would come from records. The town hall sat 3 blocks from the pier, a low brick building with salt stains creeping up its foundation. Inside, it smelled like dust and old paper. The clerk behind the desk barely looked up when I walked in. You need something? Property records, I said, for Harbour Lane. She pointed toward a side room. Public archives are through there. The room was smaller than I expected. Metal shelves, stacks of folders, old maps rolled into tubes. Nothing digital. Just paper. Paper can't rewrite itself as easily. I started with property maps, Harbour Lane, lot numbers, ownership records. Everything looked ordinary. 12, 16, 18, 20. No missing entry, no deleted structure. Just the same clean sequence Evan had described. But then I noticed something strange. The older maps didn't line up perfectly. On a chart dated 30 years ago, the spacing between the houses was different. Subtle, barely noticeable, but there was less empty land between 2 of the properties, as if something had once filled that space. I checked the ownership registry from the same year, and that's where I saw the name, Thomas Hale. The address listed beside it wasn't the lighthouse, it was Harbour Lane, the exact stretch of shoreline where the empty space sat now. Thomas Hale used to live there. The property record ended abruptly. No sale, no transfer of ownership, no demolition permit, just a final note, removed from registry. I felt a cold pressure behind my eyes, because I already knew what that meant. It hadn't been removed. It had been taken. I kept searching, Newspapers, maintenance reports, harbour logs. Thomas Hale had been the lighthouse keeper for 27 years, longer than anyone before him. But the last 5 years of his service looked different. Short notes in harbour reports, complaints from town council meetings. Keeper refuses scheduled inspections. Keeper declining supply deliveries. Keeper claims lighthouse must remain occupied. One article stood out, a small column buried near the back of the paper, dated 14 years ago. The headline read, "Lighthouse keeper found dead." The article said Thomas Hale had suffered a heart attack, collapsed inside the tower. The beam stopped rotating for several minutes before harbour authorities restored the system. But the part that caught my attention wasn't the cause of death. It was the timestamp. The beam stopped at 2:13 a.m. and it remained fixed for 12 minutes. 12 full minutes facing the mainland. After that night, several properties along Harbour Lane were quietly corrected in the registry. Spacing between lots adjusted, addresses renumbered. One of those properties had belonged to Thomas Hale. His house. The one that used to stand exactly where the empty space was now. I sat there staring at the file for a long time, because the pattern was impossible to ignore. Every hesitation of the beam cost the town something. A house, a building, a piece of shoreline. Thomas Hale had spent decades keeping that beam moving, and the one time it stopped long enough, the mimic took his home. Maybe more. I folded the map and returned it to the shelf. Outside, the sky had started turning grey with late afternoon fog rolling in from the water. The lighthouse beam was already visible in the distance, turning, counting, holding the line. I understood something then. Thomas Hale hadn't stayed in that tower for 27 years because it was his job. He stayed because he knew what would happen if he left. And now, so did I. By the time the fog reached the harbour, I was already heading back to the lighthouse. The already reached the water by the time I returned. From the back, the lighthouse looked exactly the same as it had that morning. White tower, rust along the railings, the beam cutting its slow circle through the mist. 12 seconds. Still holding. The boat engine shut off with a dull cough as I tied the line to the ladder. For a moment I just stood there, listening. No foghorn, no humming, no pressure in the air. But that didn't make me feel better. It felt like the ocean was waiting. The climb back into the tower felt longer than usual. The spiral staircase echoed under my boots, metal steps, stone walls, every sound travelling farther than it should have. Halfway up I stopped. The dust on the landing had been disturbed again, not footprints this time, just a long, uneven streak, like something heavy had been dragged across the floor, toward the stairs. I didn't follow it. Instead, I kept climbing, because I already knew where the answers were. The lantern room door creaked as I pushed it open. The beams swept across the fog, out to sea, back toward town, out again. 12 seconds. Perfect. The logbook sat exactly where I had left it, but something about it felt different. The pages near the back were thicker, stiff, like they had been pressed together for years. I opened the book slowly. Several pages had been sealed along the edges, not glued, just stuck together by time. When I pulled them apart, a folded sheet slipped loose and fell onto the desk. Different paper, older. The handwriting was unmistakable. Thomas Hale. The entry wasn't dated, just a single sentence written across the top. If you're reading this, the beam has already failed once. I kept reading. The rest of the page was written in short lines, uneven, like someone writing while the tower shook. The light is not for ships. It never was. The rotation keeps it from aligning with land. It did the first time 27 years ago. Thought it was a horn from a ship, but ships don't answer back. There is something in the water, older than the town, older than the lighthouse. It learns voices. It waits for someone to answer. My eyes moved down the page. The writing grew more hurried, more cramped. The beam stopped tonight. 12 minutes. That was enough. I saw it. Not a body, not a creature. Just a shape trying to exist where it shouldn't. Standing in the surf. Looking up. It knew my name. The final lines were written darker than the rest. The pen must have been pressed hard into the paper. If the beam ever stops again, do not let it speak first. Do not answer it. And whatever happens, do not leave the lantern room. The entry ended there. No signature, no final note, just a blank page after it. Outside the glass, the fog thickened across the water. The beam passed over the shoreline, back toward the sea, out again. 11 seconds. I looked up slowly, because for the first time since I arrived, the rotation was no longer perfect. I counted again. Out to sea, back toward town, out again. 11 seconds. Not 12. The beam swept across the fog and vanished into the dark water beyond the rocks. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then it returned across the shoreline. The motor shuddered beneath my feet. 10 seconds. The lighthouse had never done that before. Even during storms, the rotation stayed precise. Thomas Hale had written about hesitation, but this wasn't hesitation. Something was slowing it down. The foghorn began again. Not from the stairwell this time, not from the walls, from the water. Low, deep, so deep it felt more like pressure than sound. The glass of the lantern room vibrated softly. I stepped closer to the window. The beam cut across the fog. For a fraction of a second, something in the water interrupted the light. Not clearly, just a distortion, like the horizon had folded upward. Then the beam moved on. 9 seconds. The motor groaned again. I opened the maintenance panel beneath the rotation housing. Everything inside looked normal. Belts intact, voltage steady, no mechanical drag. But the resistance in the system was increasing, like something outside the lighthouse was pushing against the beam itself. The foghorn sounded again, closer. The tone stretched longer this time. And underneath it, I heard voices. Not one, several, faint, layered, repeating words I couldn't quite understand. Except for one. My name. The beam swept back across the sea. This time the distortion lasted longer. The light bent across something massive beneath the surface. Not a body, not a shape I could fully see, just a section of water lifting higher than the waves around it, like the ocean itself was trying to stand. The beam moved on before my mind could make sense of it. 8 seconds. 7. The lighthouse trembled. A long metallic scream echoed through the tower. The rotation slowed again. The beam drifted toward the mainland. 6 seconds. 5. 4. I grabbed the control lever beneath the housing. Manual override. Thomas must have used it. The metal felt ice cold in my hands. The foghorn roared again. The voices rose with it, calling, repeating, waiting for me to answer. 3 seconds. The beam held on the town. The shoreline disappeared into a wall of fog. For a moment, the world felt completely still. Then something moved out there, far beyond the rocks, something the light could not fully reach. The beam swept across part of it, just enough to reveal a fragment, a towering curve of water rising above the surface. Not breaking, not falling, holding shape, as if something beneath the sea had begun to stand. The beam moved again. The shape vanished back into darkness. 2 seconds. The motor screamed. The entire tower shook. And I realized something that made my hands tighten around the lever. Thomas Hale hadn't been exaggerating. The beam wasn't guiding ships. It was keeping something enormous from aligning with land. And tonight, it was getting closer. Beneath my feet, the beam dragged slowly across the fog, not rotating anymore, drifting. The control lever shuddered in my hands as the system fought against whatever pressure was pushing back from the sea. 4 seconds. 3. The light held on the mainland, and the foghorn roared, not a horn anymore, a voice. Dozens of voices layered together, fishermen, children, strangers, all speaking through the same impossible tone, calling my name, waiting for me to answer. I didn't. Thomas Hale's words sat open on the desk behind me. Do not let it speak first. Do not answer it. The beam slipped again. 2 seconds. The fog along the shoreline began to move, not drifting with the wind, rising. A massive shadow beneath the water pushed upward toward the surface. The beam swept across it for a moment, and the sea bent around something far too large to belong there. Not a creature, not a body, just a portion of something that stretched beyond the reach of the light. A curve of water lifting higher than the rocks, holding shape, like the ocean itself was standing up. The lighthouse trembled violently. The glass of the lantern rattled in its frame. 1 second, the voices grew louder, closer, repeating the same words over and over. Can you see me? Can you see me? Can... I pulled the lever, hard. The gears screamed. The motor jerked violently as the beam snapped forward across the fog. Out to sea, away from the mainland, the pressure inside the tower lifted instantly, like something enormous had released its grip. The voices cut off mid-word. The foghorn fell silent. Outside, the shape in the water collapsed back into the dark surface of the ocean. The last continued its arc, slow, steady, 12 seconds. I didn't move for a long time, my hands wrapped around the manual lever. The wog drifted slowly away from the shoreline. From the sea looked calm again, normal, like nothing had happened. Eventually I let the lever return to its resting position. The automated motor resumed control. The beam kept moving, perfect rotation. 12 seconds, always 12. The logbook lay about. Thomas Hale's wart begun. I felt it watch the ground, differently now. Why he stayed. Why he refused inspections. Why he stopped leaving the tower near the end. Because the words. Once you know what the light is really doing, you can't walk away from it. The town will never remember the houses that vanished. The records will continue correcting themselves. People will keep living their lives along that shoreline, and they'll coast the dark water comes to the time. Every night the beam basely these groupings, out to sea, back toward the word. Out again, 12 seconds. 12, 12. The harbour authority still made it the place an automated lighthouse, but I really even the system runs itself. But Irato strains sometimes. The rotation slips, and when it does, someone has to be here to pull the lever. Thomas Hale held the line for 27 years. Now it's my turn, and every 12 seconds, I make sure the light keeps moving. If this echo stayed with you, stay with us. Subscribe for more.